One of the important figures in early Christianity, particularly linked with the Church of Jerusalem, is the figure of James. And with me to discuss what we know about the figure of James of Jerusalem is my colleague Roland Deines. Roland, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
James, what do we know?
On the one hand, we know quite a bit about James, although he's one of the less famous figures within the New Testament. So he's an important figure in the early Christian movement. And if we combine all the material together in the New Testament, we will see he is regarded as the brother of Jesus, which in itself makes him to a very important figure. He's described as family member, as one who is not believing in the mission and the message of his brother as long as he was alive. But then we have in a letter of Paul the comment that he received a vision or experience of the risen Lord, and so this obviously brought him to faith into his brother, and later on he became quite an important figure within the church in Jerusalem, and he's well attested in the New Testament and then even in the Jewish historian Josephus, and later then in early Christian sources from very early on. And what I find interesting and fascinating with regard to James is that he actually appears in every part of the New Testament. So he's mentioned in all four Gospels. He is mentioned in the book of Acts. He's mentioned in two of Paul's letters, namely in Galatians and in 1 Corinthians. And in addition, we have a letter which is written in his name or attributed to him or actually written by himself. And we have a second letter, the letter of Jude, which refers back to the letter of James. And so he is actually, without revelation, the last part of the New Testament, he is actually everywhere in all parts of the New Testament, which in a way demonstrates the importance of this figure. And if we try to summarize, okay, he was a brother of Jesus, and then the question is, of course, for a Protestant, this does not matter so much, so there is no problem with having a brother of Jesus. For Catholics and the Orthodox tradition, and actually for the Reformation period and the time of the 16th, 17th century, even in Protestantism, this conflicts with the idea of Mary as a perpetual virgin.
Ever virgin.
So there was always ways to get around this notion that we have clearly mentioned the brothers and sisters of Jesus in the Gospels. And so we have, in a way, different attempts to get rid of this conflict. And one which, in a way, I find interesting and partly even convincing is that the brothers and sisters mentioned in the New Testament are actually older siblings of Jesus, which are from a first marriage of his father Joseph, and not actually younger siblings from Mary.
Well, of course, that's the story that ultimately goes back to the 2nd century work, that we call the Proto-Evangelium of James, where already there is a very developed agenda to have Mary as the ever-virgin and to separate Jesus very much from the normal bonds of family and society.
Which is actually a very interesting thing, because this idea of Mary as ever-virgin developed within early Christianity in a time when the relatives of Jesus were still responsible for the church in Jerusalem. That means the relatives of Jesus are still around, and nevertheless they could bring forward this kind of text that Mary was a virgin forever and had no other children. And we have no contradicting evidence, so no voice which says, no, actually this is not right. So a kind of conflicting position which hints to a certain extent to the fact that Mary had no other children.
But there's an interesting development in the writings of the American Catholic scholar John Meyer, who's written this series of volumes, A Marginal Jew. And in the first volume, he's very hesitant about James and the other brothers and sisters of Jesus. And in the second volume, he's more or less taking it for granted. By the time he's writing the third and fourth volumes, he just takes it for granted that on the normal grounds of historical scholarship, there is at least four brothers and two, and there are four brothers and at least two sisters of Jesus, and that all these complicated ways of trying to relate James to Jesus is a secondary and second century tradition.
Yeah, but you see, this is exactly the problem of these books of John P. Meyer, that he describes history on ordinary grounds and thinks he can write the history of Jesus in exactly this way, excluding kind of divine interaction or intervention, and therefore he has to find for everything a kind of purely historical solution. And he has not yet written his part on the resurrection, because when he follows this path, he has to find a very historical solution for the resurrection as well. So I am not following this path. I would say we have to allow for this kind of trans-empirical realities in the story and history of Jesus. And therefore I have no problems to assume that there were no other siblings. And that says nothing about if Mary was a virgin forever or anything like this. It's just the fact that there are good reasons that Jesus was the only child of Mary and that his brothers are actually his half-brothers. And one of the reasons for me is that when we see them, when Jesus starts his mission, the family is not happy about it and tries to bring him back under the control of the family. So in the Gospel of Mark, it's actually said they try to arrest him. And the brothers and Mary are coming forth to arrest Jesus. And this makes much more sense if these are older brothers, because then they are in a way responsible when the father is no longer there for the misdoings, or what they saw as misdoings of their younger brother, and to try to stop him. Whereas the other way around, if he's a kind of the eldest brother, then it's much harder to find this way of thinking.
So in a way, you are actually giving new life into the theory that's found in the Proto-Evangelium and is later developed by Jerome.
No, Jerome had the other position that it was nephews, cousins of Jesus. Yeah, and I think this is not a helpful development. And from what we know now from the sources, this is no longer arguable. But the position brought forward by Epiphanius about siblings, which is a traditional doctrine in the Orthodox churches, I think this is very much to commend for. And actually a number of recent scholars, and not Catholic scholars, by the way, but Protestant ones, follow this line and think there is something to gain from.
Can I take you to one particular reference to James, and that is this amazing chapter 2 of Galatians, where Paul recounts his great conflict when he's in Jerusalem. I went up to Jerusalem, and he meets with Peter and James and John, and he sees this as somehow there is one gospel which is for the Jews, and there's another gospel for the Gentiles. That brings up the whole question of James as the representative of Jewish Christianity. Could you tease this out for us a little bit?
Yes, I think James is clearly described in Acts as the representative of the Jewish Christians, as those who as the one who is concerned that the Jewish Christians have a right and a place in this new developing church as well. And when this movement started by Paul gets some power, and the number of non-Jewish believers in Jesus start to increase within the Christian community, they need to figure out what is the relationship between this fulfillment of the promises given to the Jewish people on the one hand, which in a way James stands for, and what is for the hope of the Gentiles, which Paul stands for. And James in a way highlights that the Messiah is first of all given to the people of Israel, something which Paul accepts, but the consequences they draw from, that's quite different. And I think James is more conservative, perhaps closer in this respect to his brother Jesus than Paul was, because Jesus, as far as we know, lived a lifestyle within the limits of the Jewish law, the Jewish Torah, and never stepped over the border towards the Gentiles. There are some encounters with non-Jewish persons in the mission of Jesus, but as a rule, you can say he saw himself confined to the people of the house of Israel. And this tradition is continued by James. And on the other hand, James is not this kind of hardcore legalist as he is often described, because when you move on to the text of Josephus, when he describes the death of James in the year 62, and Josephus is a Jewish historian who has no Christian leanings whatsoever. He describes him as the brother of the so-called Messiah, making very clear that he don't fancy Jesus as Messiah. And he says that James was accused and then stoned to death as a result transgressing the law. So obviously from a very rigid perspective, James could be seen as a transgressor as well. And I don't see this evidence in our sources that we have actually a strictly law-abiding Christian community. We have some fringes in this direction, but the majority of the Jewish Christians in the 1st century and 2nd century are in contact with the Gentile Christianity and still trying to preserve some of their specific identities. And in a way, the conflict between James and Paul represents an unresolved question until today within the families of the churches, because we have no representative, no voice for Jewish Christians. And in the New Testament, you have, in a way, the great figures. You have Peter, you have Paul, and you have John. And in the beginning of the ecumenical movement, it was always described in a way that Peter represents the Catholic tradition, whereas Paul represents the Protestant tradition, and John represents the Orthodox tradition. And so, in a way, we need James to add to this, because Christianity lacks something when the Jewish element and believers from a Jewish origin miss in this whole game. And so, therefore, I think James is very important, and James has an important place within the New Testament, within the early church history. But from the 4th century at the latest, it stops, and Augustine made the very strong point: you have to decide either to be Jewish or to be Christian, but you can't be both at the same time. And this became a kind of doctrine until the 20th century. That means a Jew who wanted to start to believe in Jesus or wanted to become a member of the Christian church had to stop to be part of his own tradition. And so the whole question of the election of the Jewish people plays into this.
There's one question which I have to ask you, which is slightly to the side of James of Jerusalem, and that is that Christians remember James the Greater and James the Less. Can you try to tease out this for us?
Yeah, James is a very popular name in the New Testament. Yaakov in Hebrew. Of course, because the first one with this name is father of Israel, the father of the 12 tribes. So at the beginning of the people of Israel stands Yaakov, James, Jacob. And so it is, from all we know, one of the most prominent names. And we have in the New Testament itself, it depends how many you identify, but you can make up to 7 different persons called James. And we have already 2 within the list of the 12 disciples. We have James, the brother of John, the son of Zebedee, and he's normally described as James the Greater. So he's a very famous figure belonging to the circle of the 12 apostles, but he died in Jerusalem as a martyr already in the 40s. So he is very early on, has to leave the stage. And James the Less is within the list of the 12 apostles, James the son of Alphaeus. And this person was in this version of Jerome identified with, this is a complicated calculation, but in the end it turns out that James the Less is the cousin of Jesus, with the result that James the Less is often identified in the Catholic tradition with the brother of Jesus.
But on a simple reading, we have James the son of Zebedee, James the son of Alphaeus, and then James the son of Joseph.
Yeah, that's the more reasonable reading.
Roland, thank you very much.